No, I've been shot on 6 different occasions, man, like on some gangbang.
In 2010, nearly 30 members of the Inglewood family Bloods moved together down Slauson Avenue, heading straight toward Nipsey Hussle's Marathon store, deep in territory controlled by the Rollins 60s Crips. And leading that march was a man whose name alone carried so much weight that enemies would later celebrate rumors of his death. Thinking it was finally over for him, thinking the story had ended right there, but they were wrong, completely wrong, because he wasn't dead at all, not even close.
Relationship with?
That's my homeboy, little bro. I got his face tatted.
This was someone who had already survived being shot 6 different times in 6 separate incidents. Someone who had taken a bullet to the temple and lost his vision, yet still refused to step back, still refused to slow down, still moving like nothing could break him. And his name was Munchie B. No, a name that would grow into something much bigger than just one person. So the real question becomes, how did one man from Inglewood rise to become one of the most feared figures in a conflict that stretched across decades and across the entire city? And that's where everything starts to unfold.
I'm starting to feel blood trickle down my face. I'm like, oh, now I'm starting to get nervous.
Munchie B was born Ari Banks in Inglewood, California, and even his name carried meaning. Ari translating to soldier in Swahili, almost like something that was set from the very beginning, something that hinted at the path he would eventually walk, because the environment around him was already shaped by deep connections to the streets. His father coming from the Avenue 9 family Swans, a blood set known for its reputation in Los Angeles.
Color of cash, they asked me what color, I say red.
While his older brother was tied to the Crenshaw Mafia, meaning the influences were already close, already present, already part of everyday life. And even though he grew up in what looked like a stable-to-parent household in Morningside Park, a middle-class neighborhood, the reality was that this area sat right in the middle of one of the most active and dangerous gang corridors in South LA. So no matter how normal things seemed on the surface, everything around him told a different story, a louder story. As a kid, Munchie was into sports, playing football and basketball like many others growing up in the same environment.
I'm saying typically mess with us, you know what I mean? 60s, roll 100s or whatever.
But by the time he reached 8th grade, things shifted in a way that would define everything that came after. Because that was when he officially became part of the Inglewood family gangster bloods, known as the IFGB, a set with roots going all the way back to the 1970s, when it operated under the name Chain Gang, and their territory stretched along Normandy Avenue from Crenshaw Boulevard to Van Ness Avenue, placing them right in the middle of constant tension, with their earliest rivals being the West Side Crips, a group co-founded by Stanley Tukey Williams.
One shot her, they shot the car real bad, but only shot me once in it.
And by the time Munchie came into the picture, the IFGB had already evolved into something much larger, with multiple established cliques, including 77th Street, 88th Street, 92nd Street, along with the Ransom Gang, which is where Munchie himself came from.
Oh, where they shot you up here? Right here?
In my temple.
In your temple.
Yeah, Munchie, I put 50K on a blind nigga head. He didn't even see it coming.
But the real story was in the number of conflicts surrounding them. Because the IFGB were not dealing with just one rival. They were dealing with multiple fronts at the same time, going up against the Rollins 60s neighborhood Crips, the Rollin 100s, the 104 Hard Time Hustler Crips, the Imperial Village Crips, and even the Tongan Crips. But it didn't stop there, because they also had ongoing issues with other blood sets, including the neighborhood Pirus, Queen Street Bloods, and the Black P Stones, and later on, even the Denver Lane Gangster Bloods, creating a situation where there was tension coming from every direction.
I believe was shot, but he was the only one that passed though.
Making their position one of the most complicated in Los Angeles. Yet despite all that, there was one unexpected alliance that stood out. A truce with the 8 Trey Gangster Crips, built not on friendship but on a shared opposition to the Rollins 60s, showing just how layered and unpredictable these alliances could become. Munchie's closest circle within the Ransom clique included Davion, Red Bull Gregory, and Baby Dot, someone who grew up near 92nd Street. The bond between them wasn't casual, it was tight. Something built through shared experiences and constant exposure to the same environment.
I go out and buy guns for people and pass them out.
And that kind of connection only made everything more intense when situations escalated, which they often did. And one of the first major moments that shaped Munchie's story happened when he was still young, just walking to a Carl's Jr. on Manchester Boulevard after school with a group of other IFGB members. Nothing out of the ordinary at first, just another day, until a car suddenly pulled up nearby.
Charges get dropped.
And
You get acquitted.
conspiracy.
And a few individuals wearing green stepped out, walked directly past the group, and without hesitation opened fire, turning a normal moment into chaos within seconds. Munchie was hit in the arm, and another shot grazed his head, forcing him into immediate medical care, where he was taken to UCLA Medical Center. And doctors had to staple his head wound shut, marking the beginning of a pattern that would repeat itself again and again. Each incident adding another layer to his reputation, another chapter to a story that was only just getting started.
Everybody victory lap.
It's gonna be my last, like, banging on wax type diss song.
He left the hospital wearing a red cast, a visible reminder of what had just happened. But what shocked people wasn't the injury. It was what came right after, because less than 24 hours later, Munchie B was already back outside, standing on the corner of Crenshaw and Manchester like nothing had changed. Like the situation hadn't even slowed him down. And that moment spread through Inglewood fast. People talking, people watching, realizing this wasn't normal behavior. This wasn't someone easing back into things. This was someone stepping right back into the same environment, without hesitation.
Right, a bar like, I put 50K on a blind nigga head, right?
And that kind of move immediately separated him from everyone else around him, because most would have taken time. Most would have stayed low, but not him, not even for a second. What followed after that incident is what really started to build his reputation into something much bigger. Because according to accounts from the Hood War Stories documentary,
Type of justice anyway. We don't do the police or stay in jail. No, they take it to, we hold court in the streets type thing.
that Carl's Jr. situation didn't just affect him physically, it flipped a switch mentally, pushing him into a different mode completely, and from that point on, his actions became more aggressive, more calculated, and far more visible, with multiple reports claiming he began moving through rival areas constantly, targeting different sets without hesitation, including the Rollin 30s, the Rollin 100s, and even the Osage legend Crips. But what stood out even more was that it didn't stop with traditional rivalries, because he was also involved in conflicts with Queen Street, another blood set that the Inglewood families were beefing with at the time, showing that for him it wasn't about colors or alliances in the usual sense. It was about the situation in front of him, and that approach made everything even more unpredictable for anyone watching.
He shut out the crevices, out the streets, in a position. You know what I'm saying?
There were multiple accounts describing how he would move through areas like Jesse Owens Park, confronting people directly, chasing individuals in open spaces, creating an atmosphere where residents from opposing neighborhoods felt pressure just stepping outside. These weren't just stories being passed around quietly. There was even a clip captured by Alex Alonso on Street TV, where a member from a rival Crip set openly admitted on camera that Munchie was moving through their territory without resistance, saying clearly that he was coming through their side, and there was nothing they could do about it. And that kind of statement on record added another layer to his image, because now it wasn't just one side talking, it was being acknowledged from both directions, reinforcing the idea that his presence carried a different kind of weight. One of the most talked about moments came when Munchie showed up at Washington High School's homecoming, a location deep in enemy territory, a place where he would have been recognized instantly.
Up neighborhoods or some shit, and like he's just like, hey, like he got super mad at me for even like reading the tweet.
And instead of moving quietly or avoiding attention, he sat in the stands through the entire event and later walked out untouched. And that level of confidence, or depending on how you look at it, that level of risk, is what pushed his name beyond the usual boundaries. Because this wasn't just about isolated incidents anymore. This was about consistently placing himself in situations where most people wouldn't even consider going, and doing it openly in front of everyone. Over time, that reputation turned into something the streets would describe as the biggest trophy in the area. Meaning, he became the primary target, the person that rivals focused on the most. The one whose presence alone could shift attention instantly, and this was happening during a period when the violence in Inglewood was already at a high level. With reports from 1990 showing 33 gang-related homicides in a single year, and a significant portion of that tied to the ongoing conflict between the IFGB and the Rollin 60s, placing Munchie right in the center of one of the most intense periods in that area, with everything around him constantly escalating. Then came 2010, a moment that further cemented his standing, when he led around 30 members of the Inglewood family Bloods toward Nipsey Hussle's Marathon clothing store on Slauson Avenue, a location directly in Rollin 60s territory. And that move alone carried a clear message. Because walking into that area in broad daylight with that number of people wasn't something that would go unnoticed. It was a direct statement, the kind that both sides would remember long after it happened, adding another layer to the already complex situation. Before the incident that would change everything permanently, Munchie had already survived 6 separate attempts on his life, 6 different moments where someone tried to take him out and he still walked away. But the 7th incident, which took place in 2012, had a different outcome. Because while driving down Imperial Highway in Inglewood, in his personal vehicle, a car that wasn't associated with anything and shouldn't have drawn attention, someone pulled up alongside him and opened fire. And although he survived once again, this time the damage was permanent, leaving him without his sight, changing his reality in a way that couldn't be reversed. What made that situation even more complicated were the rumors that followed, because for years after, there were claims circulating through Inglewood suggesting that the person responsible wasn't even from a rival Crips set, but possibly an older member connected to the 77th Street clique within the Inglewood family itself. And while those claims were never fully confirmed, the fact that they existed at all added another layer of tension, raising questions about everything that had happened up to that point and everything that would come after. Munchie's own gang, just a different clique. That's what made the rumors hit even harder, because he came from the Ransom clique. And if what people were saying was true, then the most feared figure in Inglewood wasn't taken down by an enemy at all, but by someone from his own side, someone connected to the same set, which adds a different kind of tension that doesn't just fade away. It stays in the background of everything, shaping how people move and how they see each other. And after that shooting, life didn't stop for him. It just changed form. Because Red Bull walked on his left, Baby Dot walked on his right, and together the 3 of them moved through Inglewood as a unit, adapting to the situation instead of stepping away from it, with Red Bull and Baby Dot effectively becoming his eyes, guiding him through the same streets where everything had already happened, and that alone showed how deep the connection between them really was. In November 2016, during an interview with Alex Alonso on Street TV, filmed at Darby Park, 3 of them sat side by side, Red Bull on one side, Baby Dot on the other, talking about their upbringing and their experiences in the set. And even on camera, you could see the structure of how they operated, how they stayed close, how they navigated everything together. And it wasn't just for the interview. That's how they moved every single day. A blind man still active, still present in the same environment, still connected to the internal dynamics of a group that was dealing with constant pressure from multiple directions, and that consistency made everything about their situation stand out even more. Because most people in that position would have stepped away, but he stayed right there in the middle of it all. Then December 10th, 2016 came, and everything shifted again, because a birthday event called the Naughty or Nice Pajama Jam was being held inside a commercial warehouse on the 100 block of West Victoria Street in Carson. With around 80 to 100 people inside, including Red Bull Gregory, who was 24 at the time, and at approximately 11:30 p.m., a group of around 30 men approached the entrance, but were turned away. And not long after that, the situation escalated into gunfire, turning what was supposed to be a normal event into chaos within seconds, with investigators later recovering shell casings from both a .40 caliber Glock and a .38 caliber revolver at the scene, and multiple rounds striking Red Bull, hitting vital areas, leading to him being transported to Harbor UCLA Medical Center, where he was later pronounced dead, while 2 other individuals, Travis Harvey Broom, a former NFL player, a college athlete, were also injured. Red Bull's background added another layer to the loss because he had played football at Cathedral High School before graduating from Los Angeles High in 2011. And he left behind 3 children, with his 25th birthday only weeks away on January 7th, making the timing even more difficult for those close to him. And by February 2017, Baby Dot sat down alone for another Street TV interview, this time without Red Bull, speaking about the loss of someone who had been there every day, someone who had been part of their inseparable circle since they were young. And with that, one of the 2 people who had guided Munchie through everything was now gone, changing the dynamic completely and leaving a gap that couldn't simply be replaced. The investigation into Red Bull's death eventually shifted direction when LAPD Detective Francis Hardiman reportedly heard the name Draco the Ruler during an unrelated wiretap, bringing attention to Daryl Wayne Caldwell Jr., a rapper from South Central known for his track Mr. Ghetto, which gained significant attention after being remixed by DJ mustered and featured on World Star Hip Hop in 2015, reaching millions of views and earning recognition from the Los Angeles Times as one of the most original voices from the West Coast in recent years. And his connection to the case came through the presence of his black Mercedes SUV, which was reportedly seen near the Carson warehouse on the night of the incident, placing him in proximity to the situation. By March 2018, Draco was charged in connection with the case, with prosecutors arguing that he played a role in creating the conditions that led to the incident and allegedly providing access to firearms. While information from a jailhouse recording pointed to a different individual, a 17-year-old associated with the Rollin 40s, who reportedly stated that the shots were intended for someone else, someone linked to the Athens Park Bloods, suggesting that the outcome may not have been the original target, adding another layer of complexity to what had already become a complicated situation. And alongside him, co-defendant Michael "Stink" Team Buchanan was accused of being directly involved in the shooting itself. However, in July 2019, after the case went through the court process, a jury at the Compton courthouse acquitted Draco of all charges related to murder and attempted murder, closing that chapter from a legal standpoint, but leaving behind questions and perspectives that continued to circulate long after the verdict, especially for those directly connected to everything that had happened. The jury couldn't reach a decision on the gang conspiracy count, leaving that part unresolved, but the rest of the case still moved forward. And Michael Buchanan was ultimately convicted of murder with a gang enhancement, while Draco the Ruler was only convicted on a felony firearm possession charge, meaning after spending nearly 3 years locked up waiting for trial, he was finally released in November 2020, walking back into a world that had already shifted, but one thing hadn't changed at all. Red Bull was still gone, and for the Inglewood family Bloods, whatever decision came out of a courtroom in Compton didn't settle anything. It didn't close the chapter. It didn't erase what had happened. At that gap between the legal outcome and the street reality is what kept everything alive under the surface, building tension instead of releasing it. Once Draco was back outside, the situation didn't cool down. It moved in the opposite direction, turning from quiet tension into something much more visible, playing out through music and public exchanges. With Chibi releasing The Truth is the Truth in August 2021, a track that directly targeted Draco and the Stink team. Followed by Hella Weird, where affiliations were flipped into insults, escalating things further, and then Last Lap, which hit both the Rollin 60s and Draco at the same time, showing that the conflict wasn't limited to one direction. It was layered, overlapping, and spreading into multiple circles. And Draco responded with Inglewood on August 22, 2021, twisting the name of Inglewood itself into a disrespectful angle, calling out individuals directly and pushing the situation even further into the spotlight. One particular line stood out more than the rest, referencing a situation involving a blind man, according to accounts mentioned in the Hood War Stories documentary. That line was interpreted by some as suggesting a bounty had been placed on Munchie B, adding another level of intensity to the situation, especially considering everything that had already happened. And beyond the music, the exchanges continued on social media, with Draco calling out Boosie Badaz for working with Chi B, saying he had lost respect, while Chi B responded through an interview, accusing Draco of acting out of jealousy, turning the entire situation into something that blurred the line between entertainment and real conflict, where each release, each post, each statement carried weight beyond just words. By late 2021, different groups across Los Angeles had started aligning themselves with one side or the other, making the situation even more complex. And then on December 18, 2021, exactly 5 years after Red Bull's death, the Once Upon a Time in LA festival took place at Exposition Park, featuring major names like Snoop Dogg, 50 Cent, Ice Cube, The Game, and YG, with Draco scheduled to perform later that evening around 8:30 p.m. And while he was backstage with a small group, what followed turned into one of the most talked about incidents connected to everything that had been building over time. According to accounts from a private investigator working with Draco's family, a large group moved toward his section, with an initial confrontation acting as a distraction before a much bigger group closed in, turning the situation into a coordinated attack. And during that chaos, Draco was stabbed in the neck, leading to injuries that he did not survive. He was pronounced dead on December 19, 2021, at the age of 28, with reports from his family suggesting that dozens of individuals were involved in the situation, overwhelming his group in a way that made it difficult to respond. and footage from the event later showed individuals wearing clothing associated with certain groups and affiliations, adding more layers to the speculation surrounding who was involved and how everything unfolded. Despite the scale of the incident and the attention it received, no arrests have been made in connection to his death, and the case remains unresolved, leaving questions that still haven't been fully answered. And on the same night that Draco passed, Munchie B reacted publicly, posting messages that made his stance clear, later repeating similar sentiments on what would have been Draco's birthday, reinforcing the idea that for him, the situation tied back directly to Red Bull's death, and that the outcome he saw didn't come from the courtroom, but from everything that followed afterward, showing how different perspectives can shape how events are interpreted long after they happen. In October 2018, 2 years after Red Bull's killing and 3 years before Draco's, the federal government stepped in from a completely different direction, shifting the focus away from street-level conflict and onto a broader investigation. As a joint task force made up of the FBI and the Inglewood Police Department carried out arrests, targeting 13 members and associates connected to the IFGB, bringing federal narcotics and firearms charges that carried serious weight, and the indictment outlined multiple cases, including Byron Busy Sumlin, 45, accused of dealing firearms without a license, Jason J. Rush Eng Jackson, 31, charged with cocaine distribution and being a felon in possession, AGA, Little J. Bird Covington, 39, facing conspiracy to distribute methamphetamine, and Eddie Coco Jackson, 54, accused of distributing crack cocaine, with investigators building their case through controlled buys, where agents directly purchased firearms, ecstasy, and meth from individuals tied to the set, turning what had been an ongoing local conflict into something that now had federal consequences, with potential sentences ranging anywhere from 10 years to life, showing that pressure wasn't just coming from rival groups anymore, it was coming from multiple sides at once. Then, in February 2022, something unexpected happened. Not through enforcement, but through intervention, as gang interventionist Skip Townsend, founder of the nonprofit Second Call, brought members of the Rollins 60s Crips and the Inglewood family Bloods together in a setting that didn't match the history between them at all. A restaurant in Manhattan Beach, where instead of direct negotiations or formal agreements, he simply had them sit down at the same table and share a meal, with no speeches about peace, no structured discussion, just a moment where both sides were placed in the same space without conflict. And that approach created a pause that few would have predicted, with the total bill for that brunch coming out to $286, a small number compared to everything that had come before. And yet by 2024, there had not been a single recorded homicide between the Rollins 60s and the IFGB since that meeting, marking a rare moment where a conflict that had lasted decades slowed down without a traditional resolution, showing how even the smallest shift in approach can have a wider impact. During that same period, Munchie B began building something different for himself, stepping into a second path while still remaining connected to his past, launching Morals Over Money TV, becoming involved with No Jumper as both a host and manager, and co-hosting the Rich Heart podcast, while also taking on gang intervention work in Inglewood, turning to the same areas where his reputation had been formed, but now moving in a different role. And in February 2024, during an episode of No Jumper, he sat down with Adam 22 and Flacco and went through his entire story in detail, speaking on the conflict with Draco, the connection to Nipsey Hussle, the incident that left him blind, and even the alliances that had formed between groups like the IFGB, the 8 Trey Gangster Crips, and the Hoovers, giving a perspective that tied together years of events into one narrative. However, the situation around him continued to shift, because in early 2025, he was arrested in Inglewood on gun-related charges, bringing him back into legal trouble, and by March 2026, a viral on-camera argument with Adam 22 led to his departure from No Jumper, showing that even as he moved into new spaces, conflicts still followed in different forms, not always the same as before, but still present in ways that affected his position and direction. Ari Banks was born into a family already connected to that world, with a father from the family Swans and a brother from the Crenshaw Mafia. And over time, his story became one defined by survival, having been shot 7 times across 7 different incidents, losing his vision to a bullet that, according to rumors, came from within his own set, and losing one of his closest friends at a warehouse party in Carson, while at the same time, building a reputation so strong that even those on the opposing side acknowledged it openly, stating on camera that he was one of the few who would move through their areas without hesitation. And now, after everything that has happened, after every incident, every loss, every shift, he has made it clear that he doesn't see himself as someone meant to guide others or set an example in the traditional sense, but rather as a reflection of what that environment can produce, a real outcome of the choices, pressures, and situations that shaped his path.